Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Would you like to reintroduce yourself? It's been way too long since you were last on.
Good to be back, Robbie, and thanks for having me as well. My name is Alex Dimitriu. I am a board certified psychiatrist and sleep medicine specialist. I'm in private practice out in Silicon Valley, California, and I love all things sleep and psych and tech related, and hoping we could have another awesome podcast together.
What is sleep? How would you describe sleep to somebody?
There's been some interesting articles that have actually said humans evolved not to be awake, or life forms evolved not to be awake, but actually, well, that they were naturally asleep and that they evolved to be awake. So sleep is almost perhaps a natural state for many biological systems, and it's really having these periods of like increased activity and doing things that evolved more recently, actually. With that, sleep serves right now for human beings a very powerful restorative function. I should say that for all organisms as well. Um, Sleep restores the immune system, produces growth hormone, recharges the neurotransmitters in the brain. And there's like physical as well as like more nervous system level things that happen on the more nervous system side. Sleep helps organize memories, process feelings. In REM sleep, we do a lot of like emotional processing, and then in deep sleep, which is the sleep you get at the beginning of the night, the brain basically defragments the hard drive. So it arranges memories, files things away, and decides what needs to go from short term to long term memory. So the easy way, the way I conceptualize sleep basically is like there's really two giant chunks that matter a lot. And there's others as well, but the two big ones are really deep sleep that we all get in the beginning of the night and REM sleep that we all get more of in the morning.
Now, what's the real significant difference between deep sleep and REM sleep, besides it being earlier and then one that's later? But like, what's the significant impact?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The difference is pretty huge, and it's kind of interesting also. So essentially, deep sleep is what you see is what everybody that you've ever slept with within a half hour falling asleep. That's probably what you're seeing. Their breathing is regular, like they are out. That's usually that first half of the night that you get deep sleep, and those are the times when like you can't wake somebody up that easily. You know what I mean? Like they're just gone. And if anybody's ever had to fly to catch a plane or like had to wake up earlier, a shift worker, if you have to wake up at like 2 a.m., alarm rings at 2 a.m., people are often like confused and slow, and it takes them a while to understand what the time even is. And that's happening because your brain is in a very slow wave form, really like dialing down all the processes and kind of like in a big shut off mode, during which it also cleans up a bunch of toxins. So people that have missed deep sleep build up the same toxins that we see in people with like dementia, Alzheimer's. So beta amyloid tau proteins, which are associated with Alzheimer's, build up even after a night of not sleeping. And it's really in slow wave sleep, that stuff that you get in the very beginning of the night, that the brain does a massive powerhouse cleaning of all that. So think of deep sleep as like essentially it is deep sleep. You're way out. You can't operate. Your breathing is regular. Your heart rate is low. Your metabolism falls to like a very low point. Your body's just like doing a big timeout to kind of like do some house cleaning, and your brain especially. Then more towards the morning, you get the other kind of sleep, which is REM sleep. REM sleep is dream sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement, and the reason they think people have rapid eye movements is because you're watching a scene in your eyes, and your eyes are darting around behind their lids. In many ways, I almost consider REM to be like the ultimate virtual reality experience because your brain is totally like just active and alive. Actually, your brain looks completely awake on EEG recordings, the opposite of slow wave sleep. So your brain is totally alive. It's enacting dreams. It's doing stuff. It's navigating a scene. It's having some emotional processing that happens also in REM. And the one main interesting thing about REM is that your muscles are paralyzed, and your body paralyzes the muscles so you don't act out your dreams. In other words, that is the only thing keeping you from acting out the virtual reality experience in your head. Your eyes don't get paralyzed, and that's why they dart around. Your airway gets a little bit softer, and that's why people snore a lot in REM sleep. But otherwise, your limbs and all that, like you're not able to move during REM sleep. And the reason that happens is so that your brain can dream vividly. And REM sleep is also tremendously important. REM sleep happens more in the morning hours. Men and women will experience some engorgement of erectile tissue. Men will awaken with an erection, and that usually is a sign of REM sleep.
Okay, well, you say morning hours, but does that depend? Like, what happens if someone has an overnight shift and their hours are a little bit counterfluctual to maybe the way that most of society functions?
Yeah, so night shifts and overnight shifts really throw things off. I do think at the end of the day, the human sleep loves rhythm and periodicity. and just keeping things in rhythm, basically. The trouble with the trouble with shift work, I think if someone maintained a certain sleep wake schedule, even if it was inverted, I think sleep architecture could correct to a fair amount. However, I think if somebody's especially flip flopping between day shifts or night shifts regularly, that really can do a bad thing to your sleep quality and sleep architecture as well. But to your question, I think anybody that falls asleep, irrespective of what time, your body generally really goes after the slow wave sleep first. That happens, your body's kind of like in a hurry. That's the important stuff to kind of that must happen. And then REM sleep may or may not happen. Um, there is some chance that if somebody fell asleep towards the morning hours, they might enter REM a bit more quickly. But that depends on what your pattern preceding that was. But I think for anybody that hasn't slept in a pretty long time, slow wave sleep does still kind of come sooner, and REM sleep follows after that.
Now, which one has more cognitive benefits compared to which one has more physical benefits? Because it already sounds like the deep sleep has more cognitive benefits. And I mean, maybe it's REM sleep might have it if you're talking about pictures playing in your head or if you're acting out scenarios. I mean, that could be a good therapy, even though like most people like might not remember their dreams, but the people that do usually wake up questioning what the heck just happened. But it's a kind of an experience where some people achieve something in their dream or something about themselves that they learn, but also the physical demands too. I don't see that really happening in that first 30 minutes or whichever that deep sleep is, because it's not enough time for your body to rest. But also, I'm the type of person that sleeps 30 minutes and feels like it's like been 10 years. So for me, that's sleep.
So yeah, you're lucky. You might be a deep sleeper. There are people that, I mean, there's people that on average can get 6.5 hours a night and feel just fine. And there's data on that too. Like the average sleep time for most people, they've shown in a large study between the US and China, I'm sorry, between the UK and China was, I think it was about 7 hours was the ideal amount of sleep for everybody, which means people that slept longer actually had worsened health outcomes. Again, large numbers. And people that had shorter sleep also didn't do so well.
Now, is that a capacity because society's been evolving to be a little bit like more or less focused on sleep as much as we market and we medicate, but
There's just, I mean, anybody that's gone camping, you go camping, you got nothing to do. You have dinner by 8 o'clock. By 9, you're like, all right, we're done. It's cold. We're tomorrow's a bright sunny day. What are we doing at this point, right? So I do think in the modern society, like the amount of distractions, the lights, and I mean the dopamine slot machines that our phones are like just really like completely eradicated the time that we would normally be sleeping. So sleep is getting squeezed out. And to come back to your point, like which one is more important? I think it really our sleep cycles alone tell us that your body goes after deep sleep pretty fast. Like it will catch up on deep sleep. Like if you haven't slept in a long time, if you've had a large cognitive load, your brain will go after deep sleep in a hurry. And I think in hospitals, for example, where people's sleep is disrupted, if you disrupt deep sleep enough, you will get delirium. Um, and delirium is like a state of like confusional, awakening. You're not sure you're kind of asleep, kind of awake. Uh, so that sleep deprivation can really like make you delirious. And if it's chronic over a long period of time, it can contribute to dementia as well.
well, going along the same lines of that, when it comes to mental health, I mean, obviously mental health is a primary focus for a lot of people, and it's become more, I guess, researched and well known now than it's ever been. But how much can that contribute to a factor of how pushed we are when it comes to sleep? I mean, we don't really benefit and give ourselves the time and really put that at the top of the list compared to eating, drinking, and other things when it comes to just overall social activities.
It's tremendous. Seriously, it's like in my line of work, I mean, doing psychiatry and sleep medicine, like 2/3 of my patients will get better just because we get them sleeping better. Alan Watts has this great line: the mind is like muddy water, leave it alone, it'll settle itself. And sleep is kind of the same. Like just create the space for it and the ability for people to sleep, and the brain can really heal itself quite nicely when it gets sleeping again. But the thing that I think we see a lot of fundamentally for me, sleep is the foundation of impulse control. And impulse control, I think, is one of the highest human virtues. Everybody hears impulse control and they think, oh, I'm not a criminal and I don't have any impulse control issues or anything like that. But impulse control is much finer than that. Impulse control, the way I see it, so your prefrontal cortex, which is the last part of your brain to develop, is the first part of your brain to fade out when you're sleep deprived, depressed, anxious, overworked, tired. Um, when your frontal lobe goes offline or subsides a little bit, you lose the ability to restrain yourself. And a loss of ability for restraint, I almost consider it's almost like you can't brake in the car that you're driving. So on one end, people that are sleep deprived eat more potato chips, they scroll more on social media, and they're going to send that they're going to snap at somebody sooner, and they're going to send an email that they might regret. They're more likely to do that. And that's the external manifestations of impulse control. Externally, impulse control also will make it harder to like get up and go to the gym or go do the right thing because it's easier not to. So you end up kind of doing mentally easier things because your impulse control suffers. So that's the external manifestations of impulse control. The bigger issue for a lot of people in psychiatry is the internal manifestations of impulse control, which is the inability to stop a runaway thought. So your neighbor, your boss, your girlfriend, your husband, somebody said something to you, and it's those moments where like you start spinning on it and you can't stop. It's those moments where you catch yourself getting upset or annoyed about something, and instead of like being able to intervene and say, hey, I should probably give this a break, you've lost that ability. So what I see a lot in patients, and by the way, lack of sufficient sleep is a huge risk factor for increased suicidality as well, speaking of impulse control, because feelings get intense, because one's brain doesn't have the sufficient ability to put the brakes on it. And I regularly tell my patients, like, if you're sleepy, if you're tired, if you're angry, if you're hungry, if you're stressed out, overworked, and or you haven't eaten in like, I don't know, 6 hours, you really shouldn't take the wheel. It is the equivalent of drunk driving. The common thing I'll tell all my patients is like no big assessments and no big decisions if you're out of it. And it's important to know when you're out of it. Lack of sleep is the biggest, most common reason people are out of it the next day. And when you're that way, everything sucks more, everything hurts more, and it's harder to say no to things, ranging from snapping at your partner, eating too many potato chips, or letting go of that repetitive thought that keeps bugging you. So that's where I think through impulse control, sleep really plays a tremendous part in mental health for anybody.
How much does that impulse control, lack of sleep connection with a regular person compared to the data on someone who has ADHD with an already stunted prefrontal cortex?
Absolutely. Yeah, whatever's going on at baseline is going to be like magnified by a substantial amount from sleep deprivation. And ADHD is tremendous in that regard because ADHD fundamentally has impulse control issues. And I should say, everybody like always like says ADHD is so terrible and all that. I also want to point out that there's a positive side to ADHD. To me, ADHD is like the root of human creativity. It lets people connect dots that like didn't make sense to other people. It creates nonlinear thinkers. There's people in this world that you tell them to do A, B, C, D, and they will do A, B, C, D on time, every time in the same order without a question asked. People with ADHD are creative. They're gonna be nonlinear. They're gonna ask you, why are we doing B? And what about R? We should try R. Right. So ADHD comes with the blessing of nonlinearity, but ADHD also comes with a little bit of trigger happiness and some diminished impulse control. A lot of my patients with ADHD, we joke that they're bingy. So bingy also is like a loose kind of term because it applies in many different domains. Bingy could mean you can't stop eating potato chips. You can't stop watching that show on Netflix. You can't stop scrolling through social media. But bingy, if we come back to that impulse control example, bingy also means you can't stop thinking about that angry thing that the neighbor said to you. So it's almost like a little bit of like I don't want to call it OCD, but it's a little bit of a stickiness and a loopiness and an inability to stop that you're going to see in people, especially with ADHD. And then the other side of ADHD is really going to be like the randomness and doing things that you should not be doing. The ability for your prefrontal cortex to tell you, Robbie, don't do that. Like that's not a good idea. That will get diminished if you don't get enough sleep. And interestingly, if people get enough sleep and have good self-care, and in some cases, if they take stimulants, that ability to restrain your behavior improves. And that's what we see in people that take stimulants for ADHD.
Well, how long of lack of sleep until you start seeing a severe diminished capacity in a person's response, whether it's short term or whether it's long term? Let's take a comparison of somebody that might not be getting good sleep for about a week. What's the diminished capacity compared to someone that's not been getting sleep for maybe a year or two, functioning on 4 or 5 hours a night? I mean, truck drivers are our best example. Those people end up sleeping 2 hours sometimes, and they'll do that for months.
So they've passed laws around truck drivers because of like the high risk of them getting into accidents. Like the one thing I learned that was pretty disturbing about the National Highway Transportation Safety Board had this presentation, and basically, sleepy drivers are more dangerous than drunk drivers. And the reason is that a drunk driver has like a slow reaction time. So there's been cases where like a truck will plow into like a bunch of cars that are stopped on the highway. And the reason that happens is because the truck driver is asleep. A sleeping driver has no reaction time. There's no reaction. You're just going full speed into whatever's happening.
Because their body cuts off.
They're just out. The drunk driver is like a little slow to react, maybe, right? So sleepy driving is potentially a lot more dangerous even than drunk driving. And that's where, to come back to the truck drivers, they really set limits now and logs. And truck drivers used to abuse meth and drink a whole bunch of coffee, like by the pot. I've met them, to survive crazy shifts of sleeping 4 hours a night. And that's stopped because it is a public health danger to have like a truck driver on the highway that slept 3 hours last night, or a pilot for that matter. The same applies there as well. The effects of sleep deprivation kick in almost immediately. Like it's funny you mentioned like weeks or months. I'm thinking like tomorrow. Like if you didn't sleep enough tonight, tomorrow you are cognitively not the same as you would be if you had slept. It adds up fast, and it also depends on the degree of sleep deprivation. If we assume 7 hours to be like a healthy amount of sleep, getting like 4 hours becomes problematic. There were statistics on this, like the rate of the rate of car accidents begins to increase like exponentially for every hour below like 7 that you're getting. Like it gets a lot more dangerous for you to be driving or doing anything cognitive or that requires attention and focus. And as you go from like 7 to 6 to 5, like the numbers really start to mushroom pretty quickly. I don't have the exact numbers for you.
Well, would you say society has a good relationship with sleep?
No,
Okay.
it's expendable, and in some ways, sleep is I don't know. You could almost say that sleep has been like a gentle negotiator. Nobody's got no like it's a slow killer. It's a slow death in a way. It's the same relationship maybe we have with like cholesterol or uh, or high blood pressure, right? Humans are kind of weird in the sense that like unless we're all there was this great article many years ago I read, which was like this pyramid of like what are people afraid of, and at the very top of the pyramid was like shark attacks, terrorist attacks, lightning strikes, tornadoes, plane crashes. Chances of dying 0.00001%. Like that's just lottery. Like that's not going to happen. And then the whole bottom of the bottom of that pyramid was like cancer and metabolic disease. So like heart disease, all that, right? Chances of dying of that like 99%. People are not afraid of that. People are afraid of lightning strikes and sharks. They're not afraid of the stuff that like will kill all of us probably. And the reason for that is it's a slow killer. And when something is a slow killer, it creates in all of us, well, we're either going to procrastinate and say, I'll start dieting later, or I'll start sleeping later. Um, or yeah, this is just something that's not, I don't need to think about it. It's later on. Like I have control. So people have this like false sense of control whenever something is a slow problem. And sleep is kind of a slow problem. Unless you're really not getting enough sleep. Like, listen, if anybody listening today or you like gets like 4 hours of sleep tonight, tomorrow you will definitely hate it. And nobody really consistently gets 4 hours of sleep because that actually starts to hurt your feelings. But getting 6 hours, you can kind of function, you can kind of get by, and that's where it becomes like a long term killer that falls into that bottom of the pyramid. Where yeah, it's sustainable. You're not going to be at your best. You're going to function. You're not going to die, but your risk of diabetes, your risk of heart disease, your risk of stroke, your risk of high blood pressure, your risk of weight gain, your risk of a plethora of psychiatric issues all go up over time. So it's kind of like exposure to radiation slowly. Lack of sleep adds up like over time, and yeah, the system is soft in the sense that like if you sleep 6 hours, you're okay. You're not great, but you're all right. You'll function, and you could probably pull that off for a long time. Many people do, and it's just terrible for them. Like look at their eating habits, look at their body weight, look at their relationships, look at their relationships to substance use. Because when you're more impulsive, you're going to go for the bottle, or you're going to go for the joint, or whatever you're going to do. But there's like this increased need to be altered because you don't feel right. So people that are chronically sleep deprived, like it adds up.
Well, how much do you trust medications and all the things that are marketed to people to help sleep? And even you mentioned going for the bottle. There are people out there that use alcohol to sleep. especially when they have odd hours or something of that sort, which I don't wouldn't call that sleep just because it feels like you just kind of are forced down to it. And the same thing with medications. I don't know, a lot of them that I've tried before, they're just not, they make you feel like you freeze and you just kind of wake up. You still have that grogginess and you still feel like, I don't know what just happened, but it's 6 hours later. It doesn't feel like the energetic therapeutic, like I got rest while I slept.
Yeah, it's a very accurate observation. So just to give you a quick like a quick extreme point that I'm always fascinated by. There's cases where people wake up from surgery where they've been under surgery like asleep, quote unquote, and I'm emphasizing quote unquote asleep for let's say 8 hours. And these people, as soon as they wake up, they finally the anesthesia wears off. Guess what they do? They fall back asleep. And then you're left wondering, well, this guy was like out for 8 hours. Why is he sleeping more, right? And the reason there, as you were pointing out, Robbie, is sleep architecture. So just because you're laying down and your eyes are closed and you're non-responsive doesn't necessarily mean your brain is going through all those phases, slow wave and REM sleep that it should be. And that's where like there's a difference between like sleep quantity and sleep quality. Alcohol, for example, knocks people out. If you drink enough alcohol, it's an anesthetic. You will pass out, but you'll just be out. There's no slow wave sleep. There's no REM sleep. There's nothing. And that's what alcohol is actually known to suppress. So yes, you were out for 3 hours, and most people that drink too much, I think half the reason people get a hangover. So yeah, if anybody drank and then went to bed, most people wake up around 4 a.m., 3 a.m., somewhere in the middle of the night, regret that they drank so much, feel exhausted, lucky if they can fall back asleep. That happens because the alcohol finally wears off. The alcohol kind of clears the system by then, and that's why the person wakes up. But the problem also is that like the sleep that you got leading up to that is not really like deep sleep. Deep sleep gets destroyed by alcohol, for example. Similar data on marijuana. A lot of people smoke weed. Short term,
They say it helps them sleep.
yeah. And so there too, by the way, I've read a lot about this and provided expert guidance on this too. So short term use of THC and CBD probably good for sleep, but I'm talking short term use, like a day or two. Chronic use, like slow wave sleep suffers, like your sleep architecture suffers. THC in the end is not like, yeah, people are out, but the quality of their sleep is not as good as it would be if they hadn't been doing that. And the problem with a lot of my patients, for example, when people try to quit, it gets nasty real fast. Like trying to quit THC, like everybody has like the worst sleep ever, and they think, oh, I need that to sleep. And the answer is, well, you actually need to go through withdrawal. And if you're quitting marijuana, you kind of need to do it gradually so that you don't have these god awful nights of like, I have patients that sweat at night and can't sleep and can't stay asleep. And yeah, quitting chronic use results in diminished sleep, and quitting, if it's going to be done, needs to be done gently.
Well, how much do you have faith in when it comes to advanced technologies being able to help people sleep? I mean, I don't really trust any medications or anything like that and advanced technologies when it comes to sleep because it goes back to what you mentioned about when during rapid eye movement, when someone's body goes into paralysis so they don't act out their dreams. I think our body naturally has that response to know how to correct itself if it's on the track of doing wrong. For instance, I sleep probably 3 hours a night. I've done that for years. I've just always had this form of insomnia because I have ramped up ADHD. But my body, I've noticed micro naps. I'm staring at you, but I'll fall asleep for maybe 30 seconds with my eyes open. And I didn't realize I was doing it until I would look and be like, why does the clock say 5 minutes from now? Or I can't remember. I thought it was a memory issue. So my body's naturally trying to correct something
It's
where
stealing
it's
back some
neglecting.
sleep.
Yeah.
Your
So
body's stealing sleep actually. So there's birds, by the way. There's no migratory birds, for example, right? Like, well, when they're migrating like thousands of miles, will sleep in flight. Like
that's
it's
pretty
that
cool.
important.
That's
Like
pretty
there's birds
cool.
that will glide, like they're gliding and they're out, but they're just like coasting for a few minutes, like totally asleep. Like it's that important. So you're kind of like a gliding bird that way. You're like just cruising for a couple of seconds. That's really not good, dude. Like the 3 hours of sleep and the fact that you're getting like intrusions into
I'm
the
not
day.
worried about it.
I'm not going to ask you how much stimulant, nice Red Bull, how much stimulants you drink to stay
That
awake.
actually helps me go to sleep.
So yeah, so you were talking about ADHD and sleep, right? So there's a lot to be said there because people with ADHD are excitable, and your phone becomes like shiny. How exciting, how playful, like how much you can like. There's so much interesting stuff going on. People with ADHD also, I notice in my practice, like not only have problems falling asleep, but then when they wake up, their brains boot up really fast. So, and it's not even worry necessarily. Sometimes it can be worry, like if there's something problematic going on, but the ADHD brain goes from 0 to 100 real quick upon waking. So that trip to go to the bathroom can suddenly turn into thinking about a million things and what do I need to pack and what do I need to the strip? Oh, this trip could be a lot of fun, on and on. And that can make it hard to fall back asleep. So the question, I guess, for somebody with ADHD is like, is there a problem falling asleep or staying asleep? And before we talk medications at all, like fundamentally, like you got to like do boring stuff on both ends of that. I'm guilty of this also. Like sometimes I just just resist the temptation to pick up your phone upon waking and start checking some random thing that you really don't need to check at that time. You know, people with ADHD do really well like with a slow down routine. Furthermore, everybody does well with a slow down routine. Well, too many people like think these days that they could be awake till midnight watching a Netflix show, brush their teeth, get in bed, turn out the lights, and pass out. Most people's brains don't work that way. Your brain can't go from going at 100% processor usage to zero in the snap of a finger. And that's where people get insomnia. You need some time to cool down, and that means for a lot of people, like putting tech away at 10 is what I often say. Tech off at 10. At 10 p.m., like 11, fine. Whatever works for you, like start slowing things down. Like no more bright, shiny anything. Search and find behavior is the worst for sleep. You realize this. Like try falling asleep and like shopping for something on Amazon or whatever, or looking for that perfect set of headphones. You'll never fall asleep. Why? Because it's rewarding. You're searching for something. It could be a news story. It could be an article. It could be a blog post, or it could be really cool. I don't know. You name it. But searching and finding is like the ultimate slot machine. So you're literally like gambling, and every now and then you find what you want, and bam, dopamine, and bam, you're awake. That is the opposite of falling asleep. Um, on the other extreme of that is like reading a book. The printed book is like it's not that reactive, it's not that responsive. There's nothing to scroll, and you're going to read the whole thing cover to cover. And I could fall asleep within 10 minutes of doing that.
How much have you come across FOMO through sleep research? If FOMO is fear of missing out, there's a lot of that when it comes to people that have maybe work at 6 a.m. and their friends are going out that night. So they'll be more than willing to sacrifice their sleep hours for the ability to go hang out with their friends and create those memories that they might not be storing and saving because of the fact they could be adding alcohol to the mix, or they're not getting proper sleep that's going to be able to make sure that their brain's functional enough to be able to handle it.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all on balance. If we talk about like unhealthy foods, right? Like smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, eating your favorite fast food, we all have our vices. And hanging with friends isn't really a vice, of course, but like the lack of sleep is a vice. Like not getting enough sleep, because you decided to go be with your friends in the short term is fine, I think. Just like smoking one cigarette is probably not going to kill anybody, you know what I mean? But it's really like a cumulative effect that like if that behavior continues longer and now the next night you had another excuse to not get enough sleep, that's where it really adds up. I mean, I'm all in favor of like being with friends, and the occasional late night with close friends is incredible. But if that's happening most of the time and you're exhausted during the day and it takes you Adderall or like 2 pots of coffee to get through the day, or you're having micro sleeps in the middle of a podcast, then maybe it's gone too far. And that just adds up over time. Those are just, sure, like eating fast food once, splurging on a lot of French fries is not the end of the world. But if it happens every day or it happens most days of the week, it adds up.
Now, what about time blindness when it comes to lack of sleep?
Time blindness in what sense? Like not being
Time
aware of.
blindness is like just not being like, yeah, aware of the time space around you. I mean, we just talked about a little bit off air about the whole time seems like it's going by so quickly. I mean, last time we talked was almost 2 years ago. So it just seems like it's moving at a fast pace, I think, for everybody. I think that happened, like you mentioned, after the pandemic and everything, and things kind of opened back up. But it seems like for a lot of people that are really trying to get the most out of their day, they're not getting the most out of their day, even though they might be functional most of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we come back to the coasting migratory birds. You spent a substantial portion of your migration like kind of dozing in and off, in and out. So people that are sleep deprived, for sure, I think there's like a disregard for the passage of time, a lack of presence, you might argue as well, because you're kind of like slightly asleep and wishing you could be back in bed. So yeah, no doubt. The other interesting study I was going to mention to you, speaking to time blindness, because there's also sleep blindness. There's people that don't really understand how sleep deprived they are. And sleep has this weird thing that happens that people that are sleep deprived actually subjectively will tell you that they feel fine, but on testing, they'll actually be somewhat dysfunctional. They did this really cool study. several times actually now where they took a bunch of college kids and they asked all of them, like, how many hours a night do you sleep? And they all said like about 6 or 7. How do you feel all day? I feel great. How's your mood all day? My mood's excellent. How's your memory? Memory is amazing. And they took all of them and they gave them these like tracking watches and they made them all sleep. They made them all sleep like 1 more hour a day, whether you like it or not. And we were going to track it, so you have to do that. And all of them at the end of a month of that came back saying, I feel better. I feel sharper. My memory is more clear. I'm enjoying life more and I'm more present. And these are people that said they were fine. So that's what's neat. Also, it's funny. You mentioned time blindness, but there's also sleep blindness where it's like you don't know what you're missing until you kind of do it long enough to see what you could gain.
Well, what do you recommend? Do you recommend, like you mentioned, studies that are based on 6.5 hours, but what do you recommend as a proper amount of time to sleep? And then do you recommend that as in one full go, or could someone break that time up? Like some people like to take naps. Naps are fun. Mostly if you could sleep like 30 minutes middle of the day, if you're, guess, given the time to be able to do so. But a lot of people, especially in their 30s and so on, like to take a small nap during the day and then they feel fully refreshed when they get back up.
Yeah, so a nap is fine. I mean, I think if a nap is like not longer than 30 minutes, it's okay. But also like if you're not getting, let's say 7 hours is like, let's stick to that number and say if you're not getting that at night and you're napping more during the day, like the answer is not that sustainable. You want to break that pattern. Sleep ideally happens mostly at night. Um, I tell everybody aim for 7 hours, but like you actually need to have a window of time to sleep, an opportunity to sleep of about 8 to 9 hours. People are it's always a slippery slope when you work with people when it comes to either alcohol, sleep, or whatever habits you may have. And if you tell people that, oh, guess what, you don't need to sleep 8 hours, you can sleep 7. Now they're going to sleep 6, right? And 6 is not a good amount. On the other hand, we tell people, hey, create an opportunity for sleep, like 8 to 9 hours, where you're in bed, it's quiet. You could sleep up to that amount of time if you decided to. And the hope is that you get at least 7 hours of actual sleep.
What about the folks that designate like a whole day, like maybe once every few weeks for like of sleep? I don't know if you've ever met any of those people before, but some people do like 13 hours. I'm like, how do you guys stay asleep that long? Like, that's insane.
Yeah, so I work with people like that. I have patients that'll go from like sleeping 6 to 7 hours or 5 hours during the week, and on the weekend they'll sleep 12 to 13 hours. There are people that are able to sleep a long period of time. There too, even though you can, no, you shouldn't. And the reality there is like if you're out for 13 hours, you're either sick or there's something like something's wrong, or you are deeply sleep deprived.
Or depressed.
So yeah, indeed. So that ability to sleep that long is interesting, but it's really not a marker of a healthy pattern, you know. So yeah, anybody that's catching up on that kind of sleep, it's cool that you can do that, but it's really not a good thing that your body needs that.
What about you mentioned like most people like during night, it obviously is where people get sleep, but how much does it relate to where the sun? Because I know that's like obviously that's like how we built society. Sun's up, you go to work, you go and do things, but then you got the people who work the overnight shift and they're up when it's nighttime. Some people can function that way. Like I can function pretty well that way. Mostly it's just the noise of the world is a little bit less, which is what I like more. ADHD, I tend to soak up a lot of information and a lot of things processing around me. Can't handle it. So it's better when things are more, everyone's asleep and I'm able to still keep going. But the sun is an important factor, I noticed.
Yeah, I think it is. I've still tried to dig up the papers. I think I found some papers that confirm what I expected, which is that. So again, not looking at shift workers. Let's say like regular overnight sleepers. Your melatonin peaks about 2 3 hours after sunset. So your body is naturally entrained to sunlight. As much as we still have artificial lights at home, the amount of light that the sky produces and the sun produces is a lot more than the lights even at home will produce. So that still governs a lot of your sleep pattern. Certainly, staring at a screen closely is probably not good for your sleep either. But generally, our bodies aren't trained to sunrise and sunset. Um, I've noticed, and this is where I've tried to find papers to support this, that for a lot of my patients and myself as well, if you get to bed earlier, you sleep better the whole night. You kind of that surge of melatonin that happens around 10 or 11 or 9. If you can be asleep around that time, your body is. I think people get more slow wave sleep if they fall asleep earlier in the night. And that in turn translates into also like a better sleep architecture for the whole night overall. I've had many patients tell me that, they thought, oh, when I was in college, I could stay up till 3 and sleep until noon. And now what I see, most people in their 30s and 40s and onward will tell you that, oh God, the later I fall asleep, the worse I sleep. They fall asleep at 1 a.m. and I wake up at like 5 a.m. and they're miserable and they hate it. And fundamentally, I call it like you miss the sleep train. Like the sleep train leaves like about 2 hours after sunset. And you get on that train, you're gonna have a good night. If you don't get on that train, it'll be a bad night. And these days, being able to overcompensate and sleep 8 hours no matter what, I think that ability diminishes with age.
Is that impacted with the time change as well too, when our clocks have to adjust? Like, do we have our body adjust with that, or do we have to learn to adapt to the new time change?
I mean, yeah, the time change. So changing the time doesn't change it doesn't really change when the sun comes up or down. It's our time perception of it. The difference now is that like in the morning you have to wake up an hour earlier or an hour later, right? Or you have to get to bed an hour earlier or an hour later. So all these time changes are the equivalent of jet lag. It's like when the time changes, we've all traveled one time zone over. And one time zone is not a huge change, but they have shown data that like people like people after time changes, like there's a higher risk of like cardiovascular illness. Like people get more heart attacks and more symptoms resulting from stress because their bodies are stressed by the change in time. So it's not great. I'm still wondering what we're waiting for to stop changing the clocks, but it's maybe it'll happen one day.
One
Um,
more eclipse, just one more eclipse, and
one more eclipse, and
we'll.
then we'll get time change. Then we'll get to stop doing daylight savings. But yeah, I mean, and speaking also to shift work, I want to point out that like mismatched sleep, there's data that like the highest rates of heart attacks are on Monday mornings because for a lot of people, you slept a slightly different pattern over the weekend. And Monday morning, you're waking up earlier. Your body might still want to be sleeping. There's almost a little bit of jet lag on Monday morning. If, like most people, your schedule is off on the weekend. Add to that the stress of coming back to the office, getting back to work, and that is a time when people get heart attacks at a peak. And that's because you're messing with the circadian cycle a little bit.
Which
I
age
also,
range? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I, I would also point out a good buddy of mine is an ER doctor, and we've talked about this, and I've read about this a lot. A lot of like people that work shifts, and this is where anybody that's doing that should be careful because shift work is associated with like increased rates of metabolic disease. Again, the stuff that we were talking about, like glucose, cholesterol, diabetes, right? Blood pressure, increased risk of like cardiovascular events. All of that is higher, obesity as well in people that work shifts. There's even more like there's even more data that supposedly alleges there may even be a higher risk of cancer for people that are working shifts because the irregular sleep wake schedule kind of messes with your immune system as well. So it's really not great for human beings. I think if anybody's a shift worker, you're probably best off like sticking to a rhythm. If you're working nights, you might want to kind of keep on that schedule because flip-flopping it is the most dangerous thing actually, which comes back to that Monday morning heart attack situation.
What age ranges would you, I guess, in particular, specify the importance of sleep? Like, where would you focus from either early childhood to elderly age?
It always matters. It always matters. Like for kids, it matters for like brain development and learning, for neuroplasticity, for the secretion of growth hormones so kids can grow. Like ADHD in kids, like anybody with ADHD, the immediate concern is like, how are you sleeping? Because you could take a totally normal human being and sleep deprive them, and they look like they have ADHD, or they look like they have dementia because they can't remember things and they put their keys somewhere and they can't find the word. So yeah, when people are young, it matters a lot. Middle age, it matters a lot, and older age, it helps preserve the brain, and it can delay dementia or prevent dementia. Um, every time you wonder, like, hey, is there ever a time sleep doesn't matter? It helps to kind of zoom out and just look at like the evolution of life on our planet. Almost every living organism sleeps, and sleeping is a very dangerous thing when there's predators, when you're not like getting food, you're not foraging, you're not mating. It's a huge quote unquote waste of time if you want to look at it that way. But it's persevered over millennia, millions of years. Every animal has like sleep, and the reason that happens is because it's essential. It's not only essential for humans at all phases of their lives, but for every other species of any kind of life on this planet. We need downtime.
Is there a certain thing about the body that isn't impacted by sleep? Like we talk about, obviously hormones probably play a factor in the importance of when it comes to sleep, and then also emotional factors. But what is not impacted by sleep that is a regulatory process of the body?
I mean, I might argue that the one like your fight or flight response, like if you really like, I think the brain still preserved an ability to. So yeah, I'm sure certain very core functions. It's interesting because we can come back to the model of the brain, right? Which is like you've got the brain, you've got the spinal cord, which allowed you to control your tail and your limbs. After that, you grew this like limbic system, which is your emotions, and then after that, you grew your prefrontal cortex and all that, which lets you think about things and plan things. Lack of sleep, it all kind of dwindles down. So it'll dwindle down. Your prefrontal cortex at this point isn't a big player anymore. But your core functions, your brainstem, like your heart rate, your breathing, like really core biologic functions, your GI digestion, will probably get impacted by sleep. But those are things that'll probably persevere longer than higher order, more luxury functions like impulse control, like imagination, like creative thinking, like memory. All of that will go first. But your ability to, eat, what are they? The four F's: fight, flight, F, and I forgot the last one, but like essential things, like you'll still be able to like run from a predator, like danger. You'll still be hungry. You'll still digest food.
But what about muscle atrophy? Muscle, like the muscular system, muscles need sleep. They need that kind of rest period for them to grow and be able to actually function properly. If you can spend all these hours being up, your muscles are going to end up deteriorating and experience atrophy.
I can't comment directly to the effect of sleep deprivation on muscles, but what I can tell you is that growth hormone is produced in slow wave sleep, and slow wave sleep is also really restorative for the body. Right? Like people that are slow wave sleep deprived have like worsened insulin sensitivity. So there's a whole bunch of things that get messed up if someone's not getting slow wave sleep.
Like higher
And I'm
risk for
pretty sure that,
diabetes.
yeah, higher risk for diabetes from sleep deprivation.
Hmm. I'm wondering, like, are you hopeful that we're going to end up having a better education when it comes to sleep? I mean, there's people out there like yourself that are trying to teach sleep, coming on podcasts and discussing it with me. But when it comes to an overall focus in society, we're not doing the proper way of really managing it. I mean, like I said, I don't have faith in all the technologies and medications. I'm kind of wondering if there's going to be proper education, at least about sleep. We have some classes on nutrition, not as good as I'd like them to be, but when it comes to overall how we treat sleep, it's one of those, I could pass up sleep tonight. And I don't really think that's important for a lot of people because we don't necessarily function right. Maybe in a less tense world if people got a little bit more sleep.
I think fundamentally the issue we're running into with things like sleep, or let's just throw it in that bucket of slow killers or slow benefiters. Look, if you want to, you go to the gym one time, you don't expect to come out with a six pack. A lot of this like making sleep better really involves like this like long-term view, and knowing that, hey, it just takes a while to get this better. This is not going to get better overnight, right? Like, I mean, one night of good sleep is not the answer to your life's problems. You need to kind of stick to it. And this is where I think society's become very like ADHD-ish. We all want quick fixes. We have no patience anymore. We all want to like, see immediate improvement. And sleep, unfortunately, is not one of those things. Just like dieting isn't, like you can't just like fast one day and lose 10 pounds. You got to kind of stick to it. I think the one area where sleep is missing something, and I think there's a potentially huge area that I've tried to explore with some tech friends, is providing people feedback on how they're functioning cognitively or metabolically as a function of how well they're sleeping. Whenever people have like those gyms are like Orange Theory, right? Where like they'll
Orange
show you
theory.
like your heart rate. They give you feedback. People
Yeah.
love feedback. Feedback has some chance of changing your behavior, because otherwise you'll follow some routine for 5, 6 weeks and still be wondering like, is this good for me? So I'm eagerly awaiting the day when your phone will tell you, Robbie, you slept, 7, 8 hours for the past couple of nights, and hey, you're more cognitively responsive, you're less emotional, you're checking your email less often, and you seem more focused on the tasks that you're doing, and you've got fewer like browser tabs open. And I think once we start getting soft data like that from the technology that we interact with every day, I think that's going to start nudging people towards getting more sleep, because they'll see immediately, wow, I slept 4 hours last night, and my phone says I'm stupid today or stupider today. So I think people kind of need that feedback, especially for a long project, something like it, you got to keep at it, right? So Otherwise, people are just kind of left scratching their heads and thinking, I think I feel better, I think I don't, and then patterns, healthy habits fall apart.
I mentioned this to you in an email, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on it before we go here. But what's the difference between sleep and fatigue?
Oh, huge. And that's a very good question, actually. So, sleepiness or fatigue, right? So fatigue is you're tired, you're exhausted, you have no more energy to do stuff. Sleepiness, I'll always tell my patients, like it's like if somebody says, "Hey, there's a bed," you would fall asleep, right? Sleepiness is that feeling you get in a meeting at 3 p.m. in the afternoon when you didn't sleep the night before, and you're like dozing off, and the bird is coasting through the meeting, right? Fatigue is just a sense of like being tired, but not necessarily sleepy. Right. And fatigue and sleepiness are important also when you consider depression, because sometimes depression can often come with more fatigue. The key difference there, and especially as we see it in people with depression, is like there's people that'll say, I want to do things, but I don't have the energy to do it. That's fatigue. Right. And then there's people that'll say, I want to do things, but I need to sleep. Right. That's sleepiness. And the third category, depression, is like, I don't want to do things. I don't care. I'm fine.
Would you say
But that
more
person
people are
isn't
for
the person with depression isn't doing that so they could stay home and sleep. They're just not, they don't have that motivation in the first place.
Would you say more people are fatigued than sleep deprived?
I think we see both. I really think you see both. I think you take any human being and work them too much and like too many demands, too many things to do per unit time, and you're going to get fatigued. And then just so many people, I think like a third of Americans aren't getting enough sleep. So yeah, there's going to be sleepiness for sure as well. And I think for anybody like that's curious, like ask yourself, like when you're dragging through the day, is it that you're just exhausted, or is it that you actually want to sleep? Um, And at the end of the day, getting more sleep would probably help both, to be honest with you. Because even if we come back to like being stressed out and being fatigued, having slept better, having more impulse control, having more control over your emotions makes for a much gentler day. It's like when you don't have impulse control from sleep deprivation, it's like driving without shock absorbers. So you're going to feel every bump in the road of the day. And after a while, that adds up. It might not make you sleepy, but it'll make you tired because everything's a big deal. Everything matters a lot. Everything annoyed you a lot. And you had a million feelings this day. And at the end of the day, that's exhausting.
Can't drive on rims forever. Uh, I really appreciate the time you gave me to come back on my show and talk about this, but is there a place where people can find any of your links?
Absolutely. Yeah, I write a lot on psychology today. My website is siliconpsych.com. Plenty of things on the blog there, and I'm hoping to write a book called Meditation or Medication. So hoping to get to work on that soon.
Are you a big proponent of meditation over medication?
So I use meditation loosely. Meditation, I think, is anything but meds, and that encompasses meditation, therapy, lifestyle changes, all of the above. I think there's a time and place for everything. But I also think people at some point need to know when it's time to kind of see a specialist, because a lot of people I've seen have suffered for decades. And to me, as a physician, having taken the Hippocratic Oath, it feels weird to see that, you find somebody that suffered for 10 years in therapy that wasn't effective, and a month of meds made it better. And I'm not saying everybody should be on meds, but I see those cases quite often. And I think every human being deserves at least a full exposure to the menu of what's possible to get you better.
That's how I am with ADHD. I'm unmedicated, but I've also had researchers on about the medication and have tried my best to advocate. It's like glasses. You need them or you don't. There's got to be a big kind of stigma there when it comes to medication, just because people put up articles and stuff like that, and it gets kind of misconstrued. So I like your approach to that.
You're totally right about the glasses, though. But I'll be honest, like in all things psychiatry related, at some point it's like we could tell you to squint harder and try to really like focus your eyes and do this. But look, if you've done that for 10 years and you're still having a hard time, at some point it's time to put the glasses on. The same is true for somebody with high blood pressure or high cholesterol. You've tried dieting, you've tried exercise, you've done everything you could. The answer is not try harder. That at some point becomes uncompassionate.
Well, I really appreciate the time, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.